we're standing in the playground, which is at the very north end of Cator Park, and in fact the northern end of the whole of Kidbrooke Village. And we're just behind us is one of the green links which runs east-west through the master plan. That provides really effective pedestrian and cycle connections east-west. There are several of them as you proceed through the master plan. The other part of it is the green infrastructure that runs north-south. So we're at the very northern end of that is Cator Park. Yeah. So we were engaged in 2016 to work with Berkeley Homes and London Wildlife Trust to reimagine the park. So where we're standing originally was actually 6 meters further down. The main road that runs through the development was up on a viaduct, and we used a lot of that material to raise the levels so that everything is now on one level, and it's much more easy to navigate and to walk through, much more accessible for everybody, in support of the green links, the links that take you into, through and out of this community. We're standing in front of the copse in the middle of Cator Park North, which has been dedicated to the memory of Tony Pidgley. This was actually Tony's idea. He was a really keen supporter of the work that we were doing in Cator Park. I think he was very proud of bringing nature back to Kidbrooke Village. What it does in terms of ecology is it provides another habitat to supplement everything else that we're doing here. So what we've tried to do in a very, very small space, comparative to a nature reserve out of the city, this is actually a very small space, is to develop what we've described as a matrix of habitat types. So these are lots of different habitat types actually in very, very close proximity that you wouldn't necessarily find in nature. We're not trying to replicate nature here. We're trying to create as much variety and habitat as possible. The copse plays an important part in that because it is of itself a habitat type. We've left the understory as a rough scrub habitat, which is not carefully assiduously maintained. It's very purposefully left to grow a little wild. And then we've got quite densely planted stand of native trees. Unfortunately, they've struggled a bit in the weather that we've been having. There's a very, very hot summer followed by a very brutal winter, which has had an impact on planting, not just here but everywhere where we work. Kidbrooke Village takes its name from the Kyd Brook, which runs through this area, or historically ran through this area as a stream. These days, like so many of London's rivers, it's buried very deep in a culvert. We did at one point consider uncovering that, but it's just not practical. It's so deep down in the ground. But we have a memory of the Kyd Brook in Cator Park, which is the watercourses that run through, are pretty much along the same line as the original stream. We really like respecting the memory. It's given its name to the place. It is the Kyd Brook. The Kyd Brook is translated in modern language as where the kites fly over the brook. We have informally, that's one of our targets for the project, is to see red kites flying back over Cator Park again. We have a peregrine falcon, but we haven't yet got the red kites climbing back, but we're confident they will. The stream behind me is actually a sustainable urban drainage feature. It takes all of the surface water runoff, some of the land drainage from the park, and runs it into this water body. When we were involved in the project to begin with, this was an open, very sterile piece of water with shortcut grass running right down to the banks. You can probably see over my shoulder the transformation that we've been able to achieve. This is through it's a careful selection of a variety of different habitats here. So on this bank you've got tussocky grassland, which is intentionally left unmowed, so it grows up, it falls over at the end of the season, and then the following season more grass grows up and falls over again, creates a very dense mat, which is fantastic habitat for mammals, for example, for them to nest in, where they have a water source very close by and therefore a food source. On this side it's quite a dense native wild shrub mix, including willows and hawthorns, quite a variety there, which again creates really great cover for insects. What we really were thinking carefully about is creating as much insect habitat as possible, because that really is the base layer of the habitat. If you've got a healthy insect population, then all of the rest of the food chain falls into place pretty quickly. And it's incredible how quickly that insect population arrives. So within a matter of days after planting some of the areas here, as soon as it sprouted, as soon as it came into bloom, the insects arrived. So from a sterile piece of water, which was really a drainage feature, to a really biodiverse water body now, from no wildlife at all to now dragonflies and frogs and herons coming in on a daily basis. Some of these little paths that cut through the grass areas do three jobs. They further reinforce and trace the line of the Kyd Brook. This is a sort of memory of a dry riverbed that runs through the park. They also anticipate some of the desire lines that might emerge through the park, so formalising those before, so where the path, the main path, meanders to enjoy a view of the river, of the pond. We anticipated people might want to cut through here if they were in a hurry, so we've created these paths. They're just made out of limestone hoggin, but the limestone was carefully selected itself because it's very alkaline, the stone, and that creates a little sort of micro habitat either side of the path, where it encourages grasses that prefer an alkaline environment to come up, which is in contrast to what surrounds them. So again, the idea of a mosaic of different habitat types in very close proximity. So in effect, we've got a very mini chalk downland being created here. It's cut a little bit short at the moment, so you can't see the variety that would be there, but that was the intention through these little paths. Climate change is having a real effect on what we plant and how we plant them and when we plant trees. We're certainly finding with species like silver birch, which we used to rely on a lot, are really struggling in the drier soil conditions that we're now facing. They don't like being dry. They don't like the heat. So we're also finding that trees that we were able to plant almost into early spring, we're now having to plant before Christmas to give them the opportunity to bed in during the cooler months and get access to water before the spring arrives, because spring is arriving earlier and it's hotter earlier. So access to water for newly planted trees is a real issue, is a real concern. We're trying to change the time of year that we're planting and change the species that we're planting, rather than continuing with old methods and just pouring more and more water on, because water itself is an increasingly scarce resource. We created this piece of art which is here to interpret the park and explain to visitors what's going on, not just on the surface, but also even below the water and below the soil, because of course a really healthy habitat like this is dependent on a really healthy soil underneath it in order for it to thrive. We're standing now on the south end of the Kidbrooke Village area and in what will become Cator Park South. So we've had a look around Cator Park North and all the interesting work that we've done there, and the idea is to continue that philosophy to create a new biodiverse park through this area as well. At the moment, this is all of this area is metropolitan open land, so it is preserved as green space. This part of the park, however, is much lower. It sits lower in the ground, and as a consequence, is really different. It's much closer to the water table and much damper in this end of the park. So we're really going to work with those conditions and create a sort of boggy wetland down towards the end of the park, where again a lot of the catchment from this area can head down to and create a series of paths and boardwalks through that area. Ultimately, this fills a really important gap in what we call a nature recovery network here. So we have the Quaggy River running in this direction, the old Kyd Brook and our reimagining of the Kid Brook running north-south. Of course, the existing biodiversity from the canopy cover that is here, But this is really important to connect it through to other green infrastructure. So to the south of us, behind the tree line, is Sutcliffe Park, which is a really fascinating park, a very early extensive urban drainage network expressed as an open water feature there, as well as a sort of chain, a necklace of green spaces and tree-lined streets that run off from here. So this is a really important intersection and a sort of missing piece in the puzzle, which we intend to fill in with a beautiful continuation of Cator Park North very soon. I think the park at the moment looks very much like a lot of parks that you'll come across in any city, with lots of grass areas, open grass areas, and I think that probably is a valid opinion as to what parks look like, but perhaps what parks look like in the past, and we're interested in exploring what parks will look like in the future. I think increasingly every green space, every development needs to do its bit to combat climate change and the biodiversity emergency that we're experiencing or that we have created. So it's really interesting to work on a project like this, where you can definitely actively combat the biodiversity crisis, albeit in a very small way, in a limited space that we have to play with here.